And this is our third installment of our live streams with DesignOps Assembly. And today we're going to be talking about scaling from a DesignOps team of one to a team of many. I'm currently on a team of one at Figma right now, so I'm really stoked for this topic. And I haven't introed myself, but my name is Kai. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm currently spinning up DesignOps over at Figma. I am going to pass it over to our amazing panelists today to intro themselves. So I'm going to pass it over to Dominique first.
Hello, I'm Dominique Ward. I lead design operations at Atlassian. And I was one of the, I've participated now in 2 of the DesignOps Assembly Learning Labs cohorts. And that's really exciting for all of those who are interested in that. I'm really excited to have this conversation today and have a wonderful chat with Adam.
Right on. Cool. Hi everyone. I'm Adam. I'm a partner over at the DesignOps Assembly. Also teach with Dominique and some of the learning labs that we have going on, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. And my full-time job, my 9 to 5, is over at Google, where I'm supporting the UX Leadership Council in a chief of staff capacity. So really, really excited to be here. Kai, should I just take it away and run with it?
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's get started and dive in. And just another reminder, feel free to drop your Q&A questions in that Q&A button along the way. Take it away, Adam.
Cool. Thank you. All right. Well, hey, everyone, and thanks so much for your time, energy, and attention. Today, we're going to be talking about all things scale. Is just a little bit of a setup. I was hoping that we could actually kind of just start by defining what that word is, and then we'll kind of back up into how it fits within DesignOps. We are assuming that we don't need to define DesignOps since this is part 3 of the series, but scale does seem like a good place to start. So Dominique, let's start there. A lot of people talk about scale in the abstract. Can you kind of help us all agree on how to think about this for at least this talk today?
Yeah. Well, I love scale in the abstract, but when we talk about the general definition of scale is that it is the size of something compared to the average of it. So that's why it's often presented in a ratio. So 1 to 10, 1 to 50, 1 to a million. But oftentimes when we're talking about scale, we conflate it with growth. And growth is really about, increasing revenue, increasing customers, it's linear. But scale doesn't have to be linear, well, isn't linear. And it's really actually more about increasing that revenue, those customers, et cetera, while reducing the rate at which you have to increase the effort. So you should be able to make $1 billion and not spend $1 billion, right? And so that's kind of where the difference between scale and growth comes in. I like to think of things on a scale of 1. So 1 designer, 1 design team, 1 design org, as opposed to the 1 to many.
I really like how you delineated between growth and scale, because that's something I think a lot of us get lost in. I know I have been for a long time. So it's a really helpful way to just kind of take it there. Now, maybe a good place to go from here is where this happens. Kai mentioned, teams of 1, larger teams. There's gonna be certain areas, maybe I think of like a service provider, let's say, where maybe you're not scaling. I'm thinking like a mom and pop service provider, by the way, where maybe scale isn't necessarily ever something that the business will experience. But for a lot of teams where there's design operations, it typically is in some sort of an enterprise setting, not always. But why does this matter? Why does scale matter within the context of how most of us are operating, which is working for larger companies?
Yeah, well, I think that many of the design ops teams that start are behind in kind of being balanced, right? So the teams already exist, they're not growing at the rate of the company. And so thinking about how much more the company or the team needs to grow then also puts them in the context of how out of whack those ratios are when it comes to design operations.
Yeah.
But when we're thinking about enterprise just generally, it's about providing, again, a broader service to more people without putting more effort in, which means you get to increase And so many times that means like you have to put more people on a problem to serve more people, because the broader you go, the more complex, the more interconnected the problems get, and you need more people to solve it. And so when we think about design teams or design operations, we need to be able to support that scale and at an enterprise level. But I would also say that it can be just as painful and complex when it's a smaller organization, because there are also different dynamics of business that are involved in that.
Yeah, just the infrastructure building it can be crippling, and there's a lot of it too if you're bracing for rapid growth and in their scale. Okay, great. So I think that we're pretty grounded. Let's go ahead and jump into like getting there a little bit further. Can you talk about like what this actually looks like? You've been part of high growth teams, scaling teams. Just give us an example of maybe what this actually looks like from the lens of the design ops leader going through scale.
Yeah. So Atlassian, in April or at the end of March, we announced that we as a company plan to grow to 25,000, which at the time we were about 8.5 thousand, so 8,500. So that's tripling, a little more than tripling in size. And I should also add 3 years. So a high rate of growth really quickly. And that same expectation on growth is there for design. So when I think about it as a design ops problem, how do we set up the experience design org for success in order to support that rate of growth? Because one, I don't know where we're going to stuff all those people, like who knows? Like our business can look completely different and our team structures can look completely different a year, 2 years from now. And so because there are a lot of unknowns, it also opens up the door for a lot of really fun and interesting problems to solve for in the context of, one, how do we make sure that we're setting up the org for success? How do we make sure we're setting up designers, design leaders for success, and also the design ops team itself? Are we in the position to actually support that rate of growth? So it's not even about the people, right? Like if we're hiring X number of people a year, we actually need to be able to support bringing on X number of people a year, because once you get to that target, it starts to, level out. So it's being able to support the rate of growth and then also supporting the size of the team when you get there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Why is it then so hard? Why do we see so many teams struggle with this? I mean, we design ops might be a newer, kind of a newer practice. The muscles within design operations might not necessarily be new, but technology has been around for a long time. Scale's been talked about for a real long time. Why is this so hard?
Well, people are hard. One, we are terrible fortune tellers. And so much of it is about planning and having an idea for the future. And when you're talking about a large number of people, you're actually what scaling is and setting up these structures for is just a large scale experiment. And so it can be, and we need to approach it as such, in my opinion, of like, hey, we'll try it out for this amount of time. If it doesn't work, we'll need to make a pivot. But if we need to make a pivot, we need to have an understanding of the impact that it has on the people involved, on the business, and what we might do to mitigate those pains. Because there's no way to know what the markets, like the external economies of scale, are going to impact the business, let alone the things that are internal, which are, again, people problems, their business problems, their structural organizational problems, their maturity problems. And all of those different factors impact our ability to do things well, but also success looks differently for every single team.
Yeah, I love that. Somebody already put in the chat, hashtag people are hard. So we got our first hashtag today. That's great. Okay, cool. So let's take it there a little bit more. We've defined scale. We've talked a little bit about design ops, and you kind of started doing this, but what is design ops role specifically? Since you already kind of touched on that, let's jump to an example. Like, what is something that you've seen of you helped the business scale, or maybe not you, but DesignOps helped the business scale at Atlassian, and it looked like fill in the blank.
Yeah. So we're in the midst of this. One of the things that we've been really thinking about over the past year and will continue to think about is how we scale design quality. So when you add a bunch of more designers, you add even more variation in skill set and experience in, specializations. Then you have more cooks in the kitchen, more unknowns, and it can become, a little willy-nilly. It's like you need to actually make sure that people are set up for success to deliver on those expectations. And so when we're thinking about how we grow, how do we make sure that we're not even just maintaining the status quo, but we're also improving the quality of experiences that we're shipping to our customers? And for design operations, I think it's really important that we find a way to make sure that our priorities and the things that we're working on are tied to the business, whether they be the business priorities, the organizational business priorities. It's a thing that, always pops up, right? We are always trying to articulate the value of design ops. We're always trying to articulate the value of design. And part of it is because we don't always do that in the context of how does this very specifically tie to the business. It's really easy to tie engineering productivity and efficiency or ways of working to the bottom line because it can, reduce our ability to ship on time. It can reduce, the performance. It's all of those things that are there's a lot of data that many, especially software teams have that is a little bit murky sometimes with design because you can have the same problem 10 different times and solve it 10 different ways, even if you have the same team. And so it's a little bit less predictable. And so when we're thinking about our planning, how do we think about, okay, scaling? What are the things that are really important or that will impede our success is if we have diminishing quality or if we don't solve X problem, right? So really putting it in the ground and saying, what are the things that cannot fail organizationally as a design team? What role does design ops play in ensuring that we're set up to win that?
I love that simple binary non-negotiables of like, what is the mission critical stuff that needs to happen? And kind of framing a plan to make sure that that's not 100% of design ops teams' energy necessarily, because it is important to grow and do some of these other things that we might not be able to do if we're constantly in reactive mode. But I just have to heavy plus one that. That's a wonderful insight. I hope that people are gleaning onto. You talked about this a little bit already. Are there any other examples that you can give of like what might a roadmap actually look like for, let's say, design ops within the context of scaling, helping out the team, figuring out how to better tie our energy and our investments into business impact? You mentioned quality or design QA. What other things might appear on a roadmap over, let's say, like a 12 to 36 month time horizon?
Yeah. So when we're thinking about how we scale or how we grow as an organization, obviously onboarding is the thing that is our number one, right? So all the things, quality, culture, how, the future of our product, it is all linked to the day one first step in the door. And so if we set up our designers for success from the jump, and not even just our ICs, it's also our managers. How do we ensure that our design managers are set up for success to navigate the business and their roles in the business and the products, and also support and manage their designers and design teams? And so our number one priority as a team is to, this fiscal year, land onboarding. And so I'm a big advocate of design operations being design, right? Design ops is service design in my view. And so our fiscal year starts in July. So we're only, a quarter into the year, but we've spent the last 6 weeks doing discovery, doing research, really talking to new hires over the past 2 years who have onboarded remotely. What are the gaps? What are the opportunities? What are the things that as an organization, kind of again, what we were saying of like, how do we paint the future of where we need to be as a design org?
Mhm.
Where do we want to be, and where are we now, and what are the things that we need to do to move the needle to get there? And a lot of it, again, starts with onboarding. Those initiatives around quality, it's not just about the process of QA or how we do design reviews. It's also about thinking about all the things that sit in there. So what are the inputs to that? What are the reasons that design intent may not match what actually ends up in getting shipped, right? How do
Mhm.
we pinpoint those opportunities and figure out ways to optimize them in partnership with our design partners?
Gosh, okay, a lot of quotes, a lot of Dominique pulls on today's call. Seems like there's a lot of people resonating with the people ops stuff in particular, which is interesting because it's not really the nexus for our entire practice, right? I only recently learned about the first DPM at Facebook. I think it was Courtney Kaplan in 2014. It started with the actual, operationalizing of how design fits within the three-legged stool, balanced team squad idea and scaling there. But to your point, there's actually a whole other side of design ops, which is starting to standardize around people operations,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of nuance to operating a design org in particular. And while HR and people teams broadly seem like they're getting better at it, it's still
Mhm.
an area where we can specialize and offer a ton of value. So great to see that people are resonating with that. I can speak from personal experience. It's been my case as well, and the folks in our learning lab seems to also be having this be a top priority area for them as well. And on the upcoming State of Design Ops report, we saw that as a top 5 focus area too, also trending in the positive. So a lot of plus ones from the industry there too. Great. Okay, so we got some examples around scale, around how design ops can kind of expect certain initiatives on a roadmap. Let's maybe switch a little bit over into like just pure on design ops leadership.
Mhm.
There's a lot of discussion right now around org design, has been for a bit. What's your hot take here? Like, what is the way to approach organizing and maybe even like the composition of a design ops
Mhm.
team? How do you answer that question to figure out what kind of team do we need for our particular environment? How'd you do that at Atlassian?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a big believer that what works for one team does not work for another.
Yeah.
It's really important to be fit for purpose. And, there has over, I would say, the past 10 years been kind of like the steps that you take, right? You have one person, and that one person, and I've been there, is the design ops person for an org that is probably is way too big often for one person to look at, right? And so often that one person looks as broad as possible or goes really deep into one area. Um, and so it's kind of like I'll try to get as far as wide as I can, but maybe an inch deep. When kind of thinking about design ops being service design, and in my particular background is in business operations in the context of a design organization, is
Mhm.
thinking about all the different types or dimensions of how an org works. So there are definitely some design ops teams that manage budgets and financials and hiring and org design and process and program delivery. What are the needs for Atlassian,
Mhm.
right? So as an example, my team does not do any program delivery. We're not embedded at that delivery team level.
Mm.
Um, because we have a separate organization of R&D program managers that manages the end-to-end program delivery of a cross-functional team. So there's no DPM to TPM handoff, essentially,
Oh, cool.
which means that our ops leads are embedded at an organizational level for each of the departments and
Mhm.
working with that leadership team um, to identify what those operational pains are within that org, which can be anywhere from 40 to 120 people. And we
Mm.
have a few of those. Um, that's just one dimension. So we've got the people, the practices, the systems, and then we also have design craft on my team. So the design ops team at Atlassian is multidisciplinary. We have operators, program managers, designers, and I'm currently hiring a design technologist for the DesignOps team, and really looking at all the things. So we're thinking about how design works. It's yes, how designers get their work done, how design orgs operate, and also how do we grow and evolve the org. And growth and evolution is about growth and development, but it's also about, okay, if we're hiring exactly the same type of designers that we have today for the problems of tomorrow, we're probably not going to be as successful as we could be. So we need to think really about what are the type of things that we're going to be, that we think, fortune teller lens, we're going to be dealing with and navigating those problem spaces, and what are the skill sets and the types of teams that we need in order to be successful in that.
That's really interesting. Can you how far out are you looking? Like, what's that Goldilocks zone look like for, we have high confidence that we're going to need to solve for X problems and thus need to bring on Y skill sets onto the team. How far out are you looking there?
Well, we're looking 3 years because that's the time horizon. That's the big bold. But 3 years for me in my like fortune teller lens is very like, smoke and mirrors. Who knows what way is up? A year and a half is really kind of like, I like the 3 halves of a year is really, and the thing is, oftentimes those type of problems that you just asked about are things that we trail in. So we probably already needed a more diverse skill set or more content strategists, right? Or more more design technologists or UX architects a year ago or 6 months ago to solve that problem. And we identified that pain of like, oh, we actually don't have someone who has that skill set or someone who's skilled enough to drive this thinking. We have some people who we want to build that skill set in, right? So I think it's one of the things that's really important is that we're not talking about, oh, we need this, we're missing this skill set, we should just hire a bunch of people to fill in that gap. It's also about growing that skill set within the org now. So identifying where those that interest, that baseline like competency is, and figuring out the structures and either L&D opportunities or mentorship, or even just like giving people a project that helps them build that muscle learn by doing, in order to build that organically within the org. So then those naturally then come together. But there's no one way I think we all know there's no one way to solve a problem. And if you approach it that way, then you'll probably end up, kicking yourself a little bit later.
Right. You might get lucky, but odds might be against you. Cool. Okay. So before we move on from here, just because it comes up all the time in breakout discussions and conference hallways when those still happened, but centralized versus decentralized, I'm still trying to kind of wrap my mind around how you're set up here. And also, is this a long-term horizon? I realize that these things always get revisited probably around annual planning and what have you, but how did you make that decision as you go with your scale plan? Obviously you're hiring, you have headcount, anticipating future needs. How do you vote on org model, and how do you defend that decision? So I'm just trying to kind of tease out centralized, decentralized, federated models, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so we are centralized, but and part of that is because, one, we're a smallish team. Well, we're larger than others, smaller than some. But, speaking of scale, I was one of one for 2 years, and a year and a half ago, my team quadrupled in size, and so I went from 1, and now we're 16 in a year and a half. So that rate of growth is quite steep. But one of the things that I really think about is what are the pains of, what are the just like general organizational pains and the things that happen when you're in a large organization. And we see it across a bunch of different levels of maturity. design teams, design ops teams, of when you get to a certain point, you decentralize design ops and they become fully embedded, but then they get disconnected from all of the other teams. And so you have a bunch of different design ops practitioners within the same company that are basically doing the exact same thing and solving the same problems and not leveraging what those learnings are. And so as much as possible, really trying to push against Conway's law, right? Which is basically the way that we communicate is the way that our organizations are structured, and vice versa. And so most of the team right now, and this will change, are horizontally focused. So they are the people focused team members. So that part of the team is called enablement. And then there's like systems and tooling, and then design craft that are horizontally focused. Within the practices pillar, we have 3 practice leads who drive our core quality practices like design critique, quality reviews, and QA. And then we have team ops, which is essentially, if you flip the naming structure that Salesforce has, that's kind of what we're doing. But team ops are the embedded leads. So they're embedded, and I use it very loosely, meaning that they are looking at all the things that our horizontal teams are looking at, but what does that mean for team enterprise? What does that mean for our platform teams? And that's partially because there are some things that need to be solved at a global level and need to be codified at that level, but there are some things that are local, and they may be the same problem because there are no new problems. We experience the same problems across the board repeatedly for years on end. The difference is the acuity, the prioritization, the context, really. And the context actually matters at the local level more than the global level. And also at Atlassian, we have a fair degree of autonomy to figure out how to solve the problems that we experience at a local level. And so ensuring that teams have that autonomy to solve their problems in the way that they see fit, but also taking those learnings and applying and playing them back to the central team is really important. So kind of going back to scale, right? Of like, how do you ensure that you're able to grow and have more broader impact? So in my team, as we continue to grow, we're taking on more, as in we are scaling, we're expanding across the org, but hopefully we're not putting more effort for it. Meaning I expect all of the embedded leads to work with their design leadership partners within their departments and identify what are those pain points that are experiencing within the org. What is that prioritized list? And say, okay, this is our roadmap for how we'll approach this within, the economy org. And then come back to the central team and say, hey guys, or hey gals, or hey people, folks, these are our pain points. This is a top 20. Mm-hmm. And over the next half of the year, we're going to dig into these top 5. And then X person in this org says, ooh, your bottom 20 is in our mid 5. We'll take those, and then we'll bring back those learnings. Mm-hmm. I'm a really, I'm a really big advocate of remixing and, and leveraging the learnings from others. Mm-hmm. So what do we know? What has worked? What are the pain points of that have been experienced, and how do we bring that back to the team and then play it back?
Yeah, and if I could go a little deeper in there, an important difference from a consultant to an in-house person doing this typically is we see a consultant I'm talking in generalities, but they'll kind of grab onto industry reports, books, authors, blogs, these mental models and frameworks that are out there broadly. The thing that works really well about what you're talking about is the contextualization of what works well within our environment from our in-house people matters so much, especially when we talk about change management, since really all we're talking about with all this stuff is adopting and adapting to change. And so, yeah, to be able to kind of take in these models of success from certain in-house teams, not only prop them up, learn from them, and then see if we can rinse, wash, and repeat across other teams. It's one of the stronger tenets that I've heard from peers like yourself when they talk about success in scale. So thank you for sharing that story. I just wanted to take a minute to plus one it. You're also starting to kind of tease out something that's really interesting. We're almost covering these cornerstones of scale as a design ops leader: communication, having a succinct plan, like generally bringing in the mindset of a service designer. We're also talking about bringing in the mindset of a researcher, which is really important too. The last thing I wanted to talk about here is kind of general alignment, which again, you're starting to talk about already, right? So you're ahead of us. But before we do that, I wanted to stop one more place around team building. We mentioned it really briefly, but is team composure, composition, is that top of mind at all when you're thinking about hiring? You touched on functions, specifically that you're hiring a design technologist to solve specific problems. The lagging tail of that was a great way of thinking about it, as well as anticipating some future needs. What about personality types? Is that ever top of mind at all? And how do you think about that as you're building out your team?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One, this isn't necessarily a personality, but at Atlassian, we have very strong values that we lean into. We have a values interview when we interview. So like that's baseline, being able to live the Atlassian values. For my team specifically, and in all honesty, I think for all teams, it's really about growth mindset. So we have a very rich culture of continuous feedback and thinking about growth and development, and also continuous learning, right? And so when we're thinking about any operational solutions that we're trying to put in place, really thinking about like one, whatever we're putting in place today is something that we're going to have to solve for and fix a year from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, who knows? So you can't just think of it as like a one and done, like, oh, that's done, never have to think about it again. So like, but like that can be difficult sometimes of like, oh, I've done this already. And so I think growth mindset is really key to that. And then also just like the ability to communicate, and that doesn't mean verbal communication. It could mean written communication. It can mean smoke signals. And figuring out the different ways of like being able to play back your thoughts and having a POV, but like specific personality types beyond like behaviors that I would want in my team. No, because I think that a diverse team, both in personality, in ability and experience and background and perspective is really important because that's all that comes together to solve problems in different ways. Otherwise, you just end up copying and pasting all along.
Right.
You get left behind.
Yeah. So bringing in different thinkers, different backgrounds, making sure they align to company values, and then generally growth mindset, continuous improvement mindset, and then all the hard skills that are required to actually do the thing. Generally, you take that in, and you can build a hell of a team. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I see that we've got a bunch of questions that are starting to stack up. So maybe we'll just end with this kind of final note that we were just touching on a second ago. You were touching on some cornerstones of kind of a general scale mindset, which is great. One of those pieces that seems to be almost the entire foundation is aligning with design leadership and making sure that we're constantly in that Goldilocks zone of value exchange between design ops, design leadership. Probably having a conversation around delineating what that actually means is helpful, which we've talked about in those past 2 sessions with Figma. I'm a big fan of the charter. Other people like strategic plans, but on alignment, especially as we scale, we start to see design leadership in particular start to kind of fragment, or maybe not design specifically, but UX is a function, start to fragment out. A great, very specific example of this, I think you said that this is how they do it at Atlassian, but at DocuSign, Salesforce, Google, typically there are UX leaders for a particular product area, business unit. driving and practice alignment once we start to get into that kind of zone to win model. I'm not sure if there's a better way to frame that. I've heard that that's how Salesforce calls their org models. But once you're in that zone to win business model, the UX leadership that's part of that is, of course, going to have to prioritize top company goals, whether they're OKRs or otherwise, as well as their product areas. Is it then up to the design ops or UX ops function to be the insurance bet for, let's say, like practice parity? How do you start to think about aligning an organization when it's in that zone to win model? I think that's how things look at Atlassian. How are you driving alignment?
Yeah, we have roughly about 8 different departments, business units, markets, we call them. And each of them has a head of design and senior leadership within that, and also their peer across engineering and product management, that they work in a squad model with other leaders. And so exactly what you're saying of like, they have their business unit priorities. So, Agile DevOps has their OKRs, their priorities, and what they need to execute on strategy. And then there's also the organizational or the functional things of like, okay, what does design or CX, our CX org is made up of design and research. Research does not roll under design. And so when you're kind of thinking about, that means you have 8 head of designs, a head of accessibility, and myself. And then we all report up to either the head of design for transformation and platform or the head of products group. So all of our products roll into him. So it can 100%, and I would say has definitely over lockdown, because we had significant amount of growth over the past 2 years and not being in the office, right? It caused a little bit of like, okay, we're just going all our own way. We're just trying to make it through, right? I think everyone experienced that in 2020. Let's just try to like make it happen.
Yep.
And then when you kind of go and dig into it, it's like, oh, wait, we have either fissures in consistency and practice. We have a lot of people putting forth a lot of effort to make something that they probably don't need to make. And then also a bunch of different decisions being happening at different levels that aren't being communicated across. And so over the past 2 years, I've really kind of tried to bring our senior heads of design together to essentially form a practice leadership group. So it's myself, the 2 heads of design for products group and transformation platform, as well as our head of research and insights. And we meet regularly and we talk about, practice focused questions and solutions and pain points that we may need to dig into or make decisions on. And so that we're aligned, and then we can then work with that next level of leadership, my peers and their direct reports, to figure out what does that mean and how do we make sure that that's fit for purpose within the respective orgs. And that's also where the embedded leads come in.
That's awesome. And you created this program, correct?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't call it a program, but it's a moment in time that we regularly meet. You can call it a program if you'd like, Adam.
All right. Well, more for anyone that's listening and in that position and trying to figure out what to do. It just sounds like you gave yourself permission. If not the organization, it happened and you drove it, program, meeting, whatever you want to call it. And that's kind of the point I'm trying to drive home, is that if there is misalignment, the DesignOps generally is in a good position to be proactive here, because it's a problem that will linger unless someone does something about it. So,
yeah, and I also think that alignment and lack of alignment or misalignment or our unexpected or uncommunicated expectations is where a lot of those pains come from, of the pains that organizations rework and oh, we went in the wrong direction, or this wasn't as the quality that we wanted, et cetera. A lot of it comes from that lack of alignment, both within the function, within design, and also cross-functionally when we're trying to ship projects. And so figuring out the ways that we can do that. Sometimes it's a meeting, sometimes it's an asynchronous page that you just need to continue to check. Sometimes it's a 30-minute loom that, you know, someone rambled on. Just figuring out what works for how you communicate and how you make those decisions, how you get alignment, and then also, again, how you play it back.
I love it. Yeah, the explain it like I'm five is just figure out what works to create alignment and manage expectations. Got it. Okay.
I'm gonna steal that. Explain it like I'm five.
Okay, cool. That's really everything I had here, and I know that there's not only 7 questions in the Q&A. It looked like a few people were dropping stuff into chat as well. I think Kai is going to touch on this in a second, but I would say migrate that stuff over to Q&A so we don't miss it. That's everything I had. Kai, what do we do from here?
Oh yeah. So I mean, number one, thank y'all both so much. This is incredible, as all of our live streams have been incredible. Yeah, anyone that has any questions, feel free to drop them in. I've been tracking a few of them. So just gonna start firing away. I think this is a really great question I saw come in when we think about scale and growth. But someone asked, in your experience, how does the DesignOps team deal with org challenges that are not related to DesignOps, but are inhibiting them from solving DesignOps problems? And they gave a simple example of trying to improve design quality when code quality issues exist. I absolutely love this question. So curious what y'all think.
Well, this is tricky, right? Because that's the thing. It's like I have had a running conversation with a couple of team members on my team, like, this is the problem, but it's not a design problem, but it's impeding design. Do we need this? Are we responsible for solving this? And at the end of the day, no, right? It's out of scope, right? How do we pare it down? How do we break it into smaller problems? And so there are kind of 2 tactics. It's like, one, break it into a smaller problem and try to solve for the design problem, keeping in mind that the root is not something that is actually rooted in design. So that means that the solve is likely a band-aid or a temporary fix. Again, have that in mind, and also communicate that. It's like, hey, we're operating within the constraints that we have. The second thing is partnerships. It is really, really important. Because if you can, and again, different companies have different structures. If you have if you're fortunate enough to also have engineering ops or product management ops peers, then figuring out the way to or a forum to bring those shared pain points, or at least the pain points that designers are experiencing that are a result of something that's happening cross-functionally to them, and being able to actually speak to the impact of the pain and where it comes out is really important. Because then maybe you're able to get them to prioritize, you know, the code quality example as a priority within engineering leadership, so that we can both tackle design quality and engineering quality in tandem, or at the very least talk to how they are intertwined. A lot of times we work very siloed in that mindset of like, oh, this is something that we need to solve on our own. And that may be true, you know, control what you can control. But a lot of times that, you know, when you're thinking about cross-functional teams, it is a cross-functional problem.
It's funny. I think it's a Liz and Molly illustration, but my visual right now is one of those, you know, Foursquare comics. I think it's Liz and Molly, where they talk about a helpful way of framing problems. And the entire punchline that I'm getting to is, in the comic, bad relationships point problems as if somebody owns them, and good relationships will look at a problem as if it's separate from the team and everyone can be on the same side and figure out what to do with the problem together. So I would say, like, that's the number one framing that I would keep in mind as anyone approaches this. If something's outside of a design ops team sphere of control, but it is in the sphere of influence. It's arguably everything across the organization should be influenced as long as it's a healthy org. You may very quickly run into territory problems. And so that framing of setting up a problem as a joint shared problem, not anyone's in particular problem, is probably a helpful way to frame it. And then I would also remind everyone is a very simple XYZ formula, which is if we do X, we'll get Y, it will cost Z, followed by another simple frame, which is what's the risk of if we don't do this. That's that. Without rambling on, Dominique said so many great things. I would just like to also add on top kind of the icing to all the value that she just said with her answer. But yes, Mark, it is kind of like marriage counseling. The other thing here too is that if you don't deal with these problems, it can cripple a business. And I won't get specific, but I have worked at companies like that where things were built on spaghetti code or whatever, and no one ever dealt with it. And it's not a great outcome for everybody. So it should be something that shouldn't just be hot potatoed around. And if you really care about the organization that you work for, it's kind of up to every single person that works for that organization to go have these uncomfortable conversations, or what I should say can be an uncomfortable conversation. You might work in an organization where it's perfectly fine and healthy and encouraged. Not everyone works in those environments, but it is important to surface these things.
Cool. +1 to all that, y'all. Let's switch gears to a bit of a different topic, a bit more people focused. Melanie asked, how do you retroactively onboard a team that had little to no onboarding when they each started? It feels like our team needs an onboarding reset.
Yeah, so what I recommend is, because, depending on how you're doing onboarding, it could be a specific amount of time that's start from the beginning, basics, right? If you already have people who've been here for like 2 years and they have gaps, what I suggest is identifying what are the gaps. Is it because they just don't have an understanding of like how you do design at X company? Or is it that they need a refresher and figure out like, okay, what are those hopefully interactive opportunities that you can do to reboard them. So one of the things that we found is that when we moved to remote in the time of COVID, that designers who were onboarding weren't consistently learning about our Atlassian design principles, as an example. So there was like a significant drop in awareness and then obviously application of the design principles. And so over the past 2 quarters, we've done what we're calling a design principles jam. So it's an interactive, ritual, not even a ritual, but like activity that we basically reboarded everyone from March 2020 through earlier this year onto the design principles by having them go through this like activity that taught them about what they were, that taught them how to apply them, and then also how to build on top of them in the context of their work. And so after we were able to get all of those people on, then we started with all the new people that are starting this quarter in advance of getting our onboarding program involved. So I use that as an example because it's unlikely that you'll be able to do total onboarding or reboarding for people who have already been indoctrinated and embedded in the organization, because one, they'll, is it a good use of their time? Is it something that they'll be engaged in? Is it something that will actually have the outcome that we're looking towards? So figuring out what are the gaps that you really need to solve for first.
That's I have not heard of reboarding before. It sounds really cool. And one of the top design leadership challenges out there is talent mobility, retention. Sounds just like a great way to use the DesignOps time and energy towards a super important initiative. Oh, total +1. I have nothing else to offer. Just I want to learn what you did. That's so cool.
Yeah, +1. I had also not heard of reboarding until right now, and I'm so fascinated by this. Let's move on to this question. I'm really interested in this. Someone asked, how do you continuously improve or put forth proposals of ways of working if you don't have design ops embedded in the delivery of the products you're designing? And they mentioned that they're finding it hard to propose structures or ways of working when they're not actually part of that end-to-end process. Would love to hear y'all talk about that.
Adam?
How do you continuously improve or put forward proposals of ways of working if you don't have design ops embedded? So I want to know where this is coming from more. Is there saying that there isn't a process at all, or there is not some sort of standard way that design kicks off and ends up doing handoff? If so, I would argue that there probably is. There's just wide variations of it, even though it's not documented or trained. How to continue? I mean, the only experience that I have that I can confidently speak to is actually just like carving out the time and creating an MVP version of. I ran into the P word was like an allergy at a company that I used to work for, and I understand that a lot of people hate using the word process. Things happen. It might be non-linear, but there is an A to Z generally gated. I called them waypoints of things that, regardless of the size and complexity, there are generally these things that we do and have specific standards, at least around kickoff is the one area that I would say to figure out a way to standardize as much as possible, because kickoff is typically where things, that's where all the planning happens. And if planning doesn't work, then the rest of it is kind of, on hopes and dreams. So even if you don't have a full end-to-end process, I would say the one thing that you could do as a design ops leader is focus on kickoff. That's the thing. And then use that as almost an entry point to figure out how to open up a broader conversation around standardizing workflow, not to get it to be a rigid process. It's not the point. It's to make sure that everyone's, to Dominique's point earlier, have the same expectations of how we do a thing, which then makes it a lot easier to jump into that ritual. These rituals are happening. They might just have wide variation. There's a more specific ask in there that I think that they're trying to tease out, to which I'm actually going to hot potato this on over to Dominique.
So one of the things that I say to my team a lot, and I don't know if any of them are on here, so forgive me for repeating the same thing over and over again, is that we will not be successful as a team if we don't bring people along the way. Like, we can't just go and say, hey, we made a thing, now do this thing, right? Because one, smart people don't like being told what to do. And then also, it's just like the design process, or, if we, as much as we can co-design or bring people along the way while we're developing a new way of working, and at the very least talk to why this is a possible solution, is really important. So the first time that they see it should not be when you're making that proposal, like, hey, this is how we should do it. The other thing is identify champions within those teams that are game to experiment. Like, there are a bunch of design leaders and managers who are like, I would love for my team to be a guinea pig if you're ever trying to try something out. And so we have a list of those people that we kind of go to, and it's like, hey, we want to test this out and see what it's like on this team. Can you test out this framework? Can you run this ritual with your team and give us feedback? And constantly iterate. So again, applying the design process to design, like what we're doing, which is designing design, right? And so really thinking about co-design and constant iteration and experimentation.
Here. Yeah, awesome.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more smaller question. So I think to close it out, someone asked, do you have any advice to measure design ops KPIs like team health, spending, or performance metrics? Like, what tools are you using for it? How are you doing it right now?
Yeah, so I mean, our team has, we have OKRs separate. Well, I'm going to say separate OKRs, but they do ladder up to our organizational OKRs as well. And they're really aligned on our 3-year strategy. So what are our top priorities? And what does that mean for this fiscal year? So this year it is, landing onboarding. So designing the best designer onboarding experience. 2, optimizing designer workflow through tooling. And 3, improving the maturity of our design craft and practices. And so with those 3 things, we have obviously key results that are associated with that, and we measure and track that pretty monthly and regularly, as is our company standard, to really track like how are we being successful. Then within the local teams, the leads are working with their heads of design to identify, okay, what are the things that we need to move the needle on within these orgs in order to be successful, and really then breaking out, okay, as the lead, what are the things that I need to drive and that I'm on the hook for. And I think it's really important to be able to separate out what the design team is delivering and able to do that we may help facilitate depending on the structure of your team, and then the things that we are able or separately responsible for driving and putting into place, because if we tie too close to if we bind them too closely, then it can be really difficult to explicitly say, this is the value that DesignOps or this individual person is bringing to X.
Yep. I'll very quickly sweep, and I just dropped a link to a blog where Diane Gregorio and I talked about a little bit more about this last year. The one point I want to hit is it depends on the kind of team that you are, and 2, it depends on the delineation between you and other operations teams, as well as you and leadership. But ultimately, the things like the core function of what the DesignOps team is there to do, I would recommend essentially creating a dashboard that you can just manage by yourself in like a Google Sheet or a more comprehensive tool, figuring out what those cornerstone buckets are that you are tasked to have to move the needle on, and then figure out KPIs there. For us at the time, and you'll see this in the blog, it was team health, productivity, team output, and team growth. Each of those things were measured by data that we had access to. There are much better there are a few components to this that probably have better ways of measuring. One example would be like ENPS to track team health. There's probably better measures out there, and I'm not here to get into the philosophical debate around ENPS versus other metrics, but we had access to ENPS, which is why we chose it. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, that if you are setting up your dashboards and your KPIs, make sure to ask yourself, can I actually measure this? And what's the blocker to being able to measure this? And if not, is there a directional measure that I can at least figure out so that we can make some changes during annual planning next year?
Awesome. All right, y'all, we're just at about time. So before I close us out, just wanted to turn it over to Adam really quick if you wanted to talk a little bit about DesignOps Assembly or make any announcements.
Yeah, the quick one is that Figma's been an amazing partner for DesignOps Assembly. There's if you want to continue to talk with other design operators, I would say just jump over into DesignOps Assembly. I'll drop a link in here. There's a lot of cool stuff that we're doing together. The next big one is the State of DesignOps report. So I would say just check out the website that I'm going to drop in the chat and join us next week for a panel discussion that we're going to have on kind of where just the state of the industry is. And a huge thank you to Figma for this series, for partnering with us. A lot of this stuff is possible because of your support. So thank you for investing so much into the community. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And yeah, before I quickly close this out, huge thank you, Dominique. Huge thank you, Adam. This was an amazing talk. And just a couple things. So 1, this is recorded and resources are going to be sent in a follow-up email, and it'll eventually live on our YouTube channel. Any future live streams that we might do with DesignOps Assembly, we'll have to see. You can always see those at figma.com/events. And if you have any ideas or things you want to hear us talk about, we're super receptive. So community@figma.com, drop your ideas in there. And that's it. Again, thanks so much. Thank you all for coming. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you, Dominique. And she's hiring. Dominique's amazing. Dominique, where should people go to learn about your jobs?
Yeah, I have one open role right now. It's a lead design technologist. So anyone who is interested in building tools for designers that help their workflow, specifically for designers, not for design system, get at me. Find me on LinkedIn. I'll post it on my LinkedIn, and yeah.
Awesome.
Right
Thanks so
on.
much, everyone. Have a good
All
rest
right.
of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.